Hello, everyone. Welcome to APQC and DSCI's webinar, Order to Cash, Performance Drivers for Success. I'm Marisa Brown, Senior Principal Research Lead for Supply Chain Management at APQC. And it is my pleasure to share with you some insights and data from some of our recently completed research on Order to Cash. And I'd like to invite my colleague, Kathy Colucci, who will be co-presenting with me to introduce herself. Kathy?
Thank you, Marisa. So excited to be here. I'm Kathy Colucci. I'm a fellow at the Digital Supply Chain Institute, and I'm focused on order to cash. So this is perfect for me. And for most of my career, I worked at IBM. I was in sales transformation, and I was also the CFO of IBM's integrated supply chain. So we're excited to get started.
Thanks so much, Kathy. So for today's webinar, Kathy and I are going to trade off sharing the results with you from our collaborative research project that we conducted, giving you a heads up now that we have 3 interactive polls scattered throughout the presentation. So we want to hear from you and get your thoughts as well. In terms of the agenda, I'm going to start with a brief overview of our joint research project, and then we'll discuss the performance drivers that we found for order to cash. I'll start with process governance, and then Kathy's going to talk about master data management. After that, I'll cover process standardization, and then Kathy will discuss order to cash automation and order visibility. And then I'll wrap it up with a look toward the future. Where are organizations looking to focus for order to cash when they want to improve what they're already doing? We will be happy to take your questions. Please use that Q&A tool throughout the presentation, and we'll address all of the questions at the end. Again, a reminder, there are 3 polls in here that we want to hear from you. Now, just a quick note on the research that forms the background for today's presentation. APQC and DSCI have a long history of collaboration, and this is our biggest project that we've done together to date. What we wanted to understand was answers to questions that our members are asking us. First, we were hearing from organizations that they really needed to understand how to have strong foundational processes in place, especially during these times of disruption and just crazy continuous rapid change. The other thing that organizations are facing is the new customer that has higher expectations of both speed and transparency for all their business transactions. So we came together and we started at the end of 2021 and wrapped up this project this year, early 2022, where we worked with global order to cash professionals to look at the current state of practices, and we also collected metric information on critical performance measures. We did a global survey, conducted in-depth interviews, and created some case studies. And we also analyzed a lot of data along with our statisticians to understand how to derive these performance drivers that we'll be discussing today. We focused on how are organizations governing, measuring, automating, and improving their end-to-end order-to-cash process. Just like every research project that APQC does, we had a globally diverse audience engaged in this one. We had 177 participants in 12 industries, and more than 70% of them are from organizations with at least $1 billion in revenue. 94% of them are from business-to-business organizations, which actually have a lot to learn from the consumer world when it comes to order-to-cash processes and order visibility. And about 60% of our participants were executives, or those with accountability for the end-to-end order-to-cash process. So we have published quite a bit of content from this research very recently, and we will be sharing links to that with you at the end of the presentation and also in a follow-up email. So with that said, briefly, what is order to cash? Just to level set, make sure that we're all on the same page. So order to cash is an end-to-end business process. It spans multiple functions, typically sales, order management, supply chain, and finance are all a part of this. And it starts with a customer order typically. It includes receiving that customer order, checking customer credit, fulfilling the order, invoicing the customer, and then chasing down or hopefully just painlessly receiving payment and collecting the cash at the end. Successful organizations find that optimizing the speed and effectiveness of their order to cash process can make a sizable impact on their bottom line. So we're going to talk about how organizations are doing that. And along the way, we'll touch on some of the key performance indicators that we see here. The end-to-end cycle time for order to cash, days sales outstanding, and the on-time in full or OTIF delivery performance. So let's start right away with a poll. We want to understand where you're coming from. So we're now going to open our first poll for you to respond to. On your screen, once the poll is open, please select one answer. And after you vote, please feel free to add details in the chat. Feel free to add details in the chat all throughout today's presentation to engage with each other as well as with us. So what we want to know is, to what extent has your organization integrated and managed the order to cash process as an end-to-end process? Is it completely integrated with a very much end-to-end focus in all things? Is it mostly integrated, halfway integrated, slightly integrated? Or are you in this category here at the bottom where it's silos are us? No integration, every person, every function for themselves. So we'll just take a moment and ask you guys to select the answer that best reflects your organization's order to cash process. All right, so we're closing the poll and let's take a look at the answers. So you should now see on your screen, 7% have a completely integrated, totally end-to-end focus. The biggest chunk, 31% of you, are mostly integrated, with another big chunk, about a quarter halfway integrated and about a quarter slightly integrated. And there's 11% of you that are living in the silos RS world. Very good to know this information that helps us as we share our findings along the presentation today. So I see in the chat, somebody said they hail from the silos RS world. Sad, but true. Well, we're going to share some findings that may help your organizations improve what you're doing and give you ammunition to help close some of those gaps. All right, so we're going to start off with governance, because this is really the big umbrella that controls a lot of the results along the way from order to cash. And when we talk about performance drivers throughout this research, I want to just say that these are derived from in-depth analysis of the data and the information we collected on practices as well as results. And what we see is that these are the practices that are driving better performance on those critical order to cash measures. So first, let's look at the current state of order to cash governance. We found that one of the largest drivers of success for order to cash is your process model. Process governance encompasses all the structural elements that enable process management to work. So here we include roles, accountability, oversight, sponsorship, and management. And the chart on your screen shows how our respondents describe their current state governance for the end-to-end order to cash process. And what you see is that only about 38% are currently managing this with a global process owner for the end-to-end process. Now, we do see a sizable number of participants that have a council of process owners that are accountable. So that's better than not having anyone accountable for this as an end-to-end process. But ideally, you want that buck to stop with someone, a global process owner. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the global process owner role and why it's so important. In general, a process owner is somebody who's accountable for change management, training, monitoring and control, and continuous improvement. So generally, when we talk about process owners, what we're saying is it's someone who is defining the process, including those roles, the steps, the technology, even the connection to other processes inside the enterprise. They also manage documentation, policies, and training for people involved in the process, set performance targets, monitor and report on those performance measures, assess and improve process maturity. Where do you go next? How do you improve? They also are charged with identifying risks, roadblocks, and opportunities for improvement, and working with all the stakeholders inside the organization, including your process management office, if you have one, to make sure that your order to cash strategy aligns with the enterprise strategy and how to implement improvements. Now, when we talk about an end-to-end business process and the global process owner here, we see that this is a single point owner who's usually responsible for this enterprise-wide process. It's typically, because it spans silos or functions within the enterprise, it's typically someone at a fairly senior level who has strong business acumen, communication, and management skills. Additionally, global process owners need to have in-depth organizational knowledge. We kind of joke that you need to know where the bodies are buried, but to understand the context and the cultural elements of your own organization. Also, cross-functional facilitation and collaboration experience, and some expertise as a change agent. So we see that having this global process owner in place is very effective. And in fact, those organizations that do have it have an advantage on two key metrics. The OTIF measure, orders delivered on time and in full, we see that there's a higher median level of performance of 92% versus those organizations with no governance for order to cash, 79%. And this directly affects your customers and your success and your bottom line. And the other area of benefit is around cycle time. We see that those with a global process owner have a faster cycle time for the entire process. And that's probably because you've got someone who has visibility over the entire thing and can see where those roadblocks and breakdowns are happening. So just as we see a disconnect in governance in far too many organizations, only 38% having that global process owner, we also see a lack of common measures and goals between the order management function and the accounts receivable function. In other words, the two sides of the hyphens in the order to cash process. What we see is that to truly align those two organizations and not have random acts of improvement, or not run into a situation where you optimize one side and sub-optimize the whole, it's important to align and find those common measures and goals to get everyone rowing the boat in the same direction. What we see is that 1/3 of the participants in our research have different ownerships for the various parts of the process, and that disconnected governance can lead to challenges like these misaligned measures and goals. And without common goals that can drive this collaborative mindset, in other words, we're all pulling together to get to the same place and measure it the same way, you may end up with different functions working against each other. For example, you may have order management measured on completeness of an order, but not timeliness or how fast the order gets into your ERP system, or even how soon your customer gets the acknowledgement. So despite the benefits from having these common goals, far too many organizations don't have them in place. So now I'm going to hand it off to Kathy, who's going to talk to us about master data management for order to cash. Kathy?
Yes, thanks, Marisa. Master data management is another key foundational enabler. I've heard it be said that data is the new oil, and certainly we see that an order to cash process is only as effective as its underlying master data. So first of all, I'll paint the picture. What is master data? It is the set of identifiers and extended attributes that describe a specific customer or supplier or product. It can also include data hierarchies and charts of accounts. When we talk about master data management, which we often call MDM, the top performers in our research use MDM as a core process to organize, to categorize, to synchronize, to maintain and enrich their data records for customers, suppliers, and products across their enterprise. So now if we move to, certainly our recommendation is that you centralize master data ownership. And we asked that question in our research. How is master data managed? 64%, nearly 2/3, said it's an enterprise-wide function of the owners. Someone like a chief data officer, for example. We certainly see that a centralized MDM responsibility is a best practice as it enables comprehensive governance, processes, and metrics. With one enterprise owner, there's clarity that the data stops here. So we also see that that allows for meaningful automation and then consistent high quality data. Now, nearly a quarter of our respondents said master data ownership was decentralized by geography. And while that can work, there could be problems in inconsistent ways of identifying global customers or suppliers, for example. And then 13% said decentralized by function. And sometimes it seems logical that the sales function would own customer data and perhaps the supply chain function would own supplier data. But if you have different functions responsible for master data, that can lead to unique data governance models and an inability to basically talk with each other. We do see better outcomes in our research when MDM is owned by an enterprise-wide function like a chief data officer. And as Marisa has been talking to you, we see the enterprise-wide function MDM organization has faster payments. So a reduced days sales outstanding, 36 days versus 39 if it's not centralized. Better on time and full orders, 92% versus 91%. And probably even most important, higher levels of automation. When we looked at those enterprises who are using artificial intelligence in their order to cash process, more than 3/4 of them report that they have centralized their master data ownership. So next, we'll talk a little bit more. You want to move ahead, Marisa? Okay. On improved data quality and management. So we asked a question: which of the following are data quality requirements for error-free orders in your organization? And this was a select all that apply. But certainly timeliness, meaning did we get it right the first time, is important. Validity, is the right data in the right fields. Completeness, is all the data complete? Those were the top 3 responses, and that roughly 60% of all participants noted those. Also important, over 50%, consistency, that a part number equals a part name equals a part description. Integrity, that there's one customer number that's related to a specific customer, for example. And then is it reasonable? So as you can see, there are multiple requirements for high quality order to cash data. Managing this data is not a one-time activity. It requires cleansing, clear business rules, ongoing maintenance. So we have a case in point. That's what the little light bulb at the top right says. We interviewed IBM executives about their quote to cash transformation. And they highlighted an upfront effort to improve their master data as a critical success factor within IBM. What did they do? They named a chief data officer. They established a customer hierarchy approach that standardizes the master record of each customer, adding more information as it got more detailed in terms of an order. They ensured that the data flowed into one standardized enterprise-wide data repository. And then they also set in place, they invested in a chief analytics officer and a team of data architects and data analysts to harvest the insights that can be obtained when you have high quality master data. So we certainly would say that this is a best practice. So now if we want to move on to synchronizing, on this chart, we're talking specifically about customer master data, which is obviously a very important part of order to cash. We asked our participants, does your data flow consistently across systems, from your sales systems, so that can be quoting or CRM, to order and invoicing, right? So typically your ERP systems. Only half, 49%, said that their data is synchronized and can flow seamlessly. Another 31% said the data is synchronized, but some issue with matching records. And then there's 10% that said data synchronized, but significant issue with matching records. So, and we can see if your data is not flowing seamlessly across systems, then you likely have issues with data not being consistent or being effectively curated and maintained. So one of the last questions in our survey, we asked, what are the next improvements you expect to implement for your order to cash process? And the top response given by over half of respondents was to improve the quality and management of the master data. So you can see, we would certainly urge that you start with a global process owner, as Marisa talked about, and then focus also on your master data. So Marisa, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Kathy. Couldn't agree more. So we want to have that process owner looking over the whole thing from the top, and then you want to make sure you've got your data house in order, running across all these different systems. So now I want to talk a little bit about process standardization and understand how a standardized end-to-end order-to-cash process can eliminate inefficiencies, reduce errors, and improve cycle time. So it is typical for organizations to have various processes, tools, and procedures that evolve over time to meet the distinct needs of geographies, of product lines, and different business units. And that appears to be the case here in order to cash. One of my favorite sayings is often, things are the way they are because they got that way, right? So sometimes we end up with a reality that is somewhat less than ideal. And here we see about a quarter of the organizations reporting that they have very little standardization of their end-to-end order-to-cash process. And only 8% say that their order-to-cash process is fully standardized. And this is the same almost regardless of whether you're looking across geographic locations or product lines. In other words, is order-to-cash performed the same way in different regions and countries and for different product lines across the company? So the answer is not exactly, but we recommend that there are very good reasons why you should look at standardizing your process. We see very clear benefits when we dig into our data and our research, where greater process standardization is associated with better metrics or performance outcomes. First of all, we see that the degree of standardization of the end-to-end order-to-cash process is related to improving your days sales outstanding and your order-to-cash cycle time. So the left side of the screen that you're looking at right now. In other words, the more standardized your process, the lower your days sales outstanding and the faster your order-to-cash cycle time. And as you increase your standardization, on the right-hand side, we see that you also increase your process effectiveness and the likelihood of having common goals and measures from order to cash. So it's a critical thing to look at when you are trying to especially build or improve a lower performing order to cash process. Now, I'll give you an exception to this rule, if you will. And once you get to the status of top performer, then you do have more latitude. So as part of this research, APQC identified a subgroup within our overall population of top performing organizations. And these are individual organizations that we defined as having critical measures in the top quartile of performance, as well as certain necessary practices in place. So I think we ended up with about 12 out of the total that we looked at as top performers. And initially we were surprised because when we looked at their data, they actually have less standardization across product lines and geographies. But what we see is that these top performers have improved their order management visibility and access. They have greater levels of automation and better data quality relative to the rest of the participants. So what we saw as we really reflected on this is that it points to the importance of the need for strong underlying data quality and ownership, because the top performers have global process owners in place and they have very strong data quality procedures and processes. So if your data is solid, as Kathy said, it's the new oil. It's what keeps things flowing inside your business. If your data is solid and your automation is effective, then and only then does global process standardization become less critical. Stronger foundation, then you can have greater freedom. And this is not an unknown phenomenon, often referred to as glocalization, which is something my spell check continues to want to change. But basically, you can have one global process, and all of these top performers do. There's a well-documented and defined global process, but the organization allows for local customization based on the reality on the ground in either the locations or for the different product lines. But we would caution before you go this route to make sure you've got that strong foundation, that you have the very good, solid process ownership, and that you've got your master data management in good order. And just to build on Kathy's comment on master data, it's not a one-time thing. You can't just clean it up and be done. It's a continuous, ongoing need to maintain your data house. So now I'm going to flip it back over to Kathy to talk to us about order automation or order-to-cash automation. Kathy?
Thank you, Marisa. And automation is critically important in this process. You can reduce errors, you can improve the process, you can improve speed if you're decreasing manual activities through automation, particularly activities that cross different functions. So we asked our research respondents, what is the level of automation in your end-to-end order-to-cash process? You can see here, and honestly, this answer surprised us because it was over 80% view their process, their order-to-cash process as mostly or completely fully automated. Very interesting with what we've already shown you, that fewer than half say they can seamlessly connect master data across systems, and even fewer, as Marisa just showed you, report that their O2C processes are standardized. So this seems a little bold for them, over 80%, to say that they're well automated. But you'd certainly not want to be in the 17% that's mostly manual or manual. So we do see, well, we actually investigated why do so many companies feel that they have a high level of automation. And we thought that there could be a disconnect. Perhaps they started automating some tasks that are easy, but they're still missing the benefits that you get when you have high quality synchronized data, such as a seamless order handover from sales to the ERP systems, advanced analytics, like we saw with IBM, and cross-sell and upsell automations. If you have great information about your customer, then you will know what they want next, right? So, but we do see that these organizations that had a higher level of automation tend to report global process owner, enterprise MDM ownership, use of more advanced automation techniques, such as machine learning compared to robotic process automation. Fewer manually entered orders, which is important, and then improved metrics. Again, the same sort of reduced payment cycles, meaning less days sales outstanding and higher on time and full orders. So let's go to a poll, and we will compare your responses to the exact same question that we asked in our research. So poll number 2, which of the following best describes your organization's use of process automation within your order to cash process? It's a single choice. I would say use the highest, right? It doesn't mean that you use it universally, but what's the highest usage that you have? Artificial intelligence, right? Which is cognitive automation. Machine learning, which is sort of a knowledge-based autonomic process automation for unstructured data and highly complex rules. Robotic process automation, which is rules-based, typically for structured data or simple rules. What we're calling simple desktop automation. And this is, you know, macros, perhaps in Excel. It could be screen scrapers, or it could be automated emails, or nothing. So let's vote.
So please, we'd love to hear from you. We want to know where you're coming from, what you're thinking. And we'll keep the poll open for just another little bit here. All right, and here come the results, Kathy.
Oh, great. Okay, 6% AI, 5%. So that's 11% at the top. RPA, 35%. And then simple or nothing, 44%. I'm grouping them. There's obviously a bell curve. Certainly you start at the bottom and work your way up. And I'm sorry, there's actually not a bell curve. There's a bell curve looking at sort of the most automated RPA and then sort of simple or nothing, but it's important to start at the bottom and work your way up. So let's close the poll, and I will show you what, on the next page, what our respondents said. They had similar numbers. Artificial intelligence, 13%, perhaps a little more, versus 6. Machine learning, 22% versus 5. RPA, 29% versus your poll was 35. And then, you know, simple and nothing added up to 44. Here it adds up to a third, 36%. So what we would say here is, at the bottom is surprising that there's so many that do simple desktop automation or even nothing. And the reason it's surprising is that the tools are available and customers expect speed and transparency. So it's really helpful to get started for a seamless experience for your customers. At the top, machine learning and artificial intelligence. In our view, usage of these two are becoming a competitive differentiator in the order to cash process, as these automation tools enable efficiency, speed, and higher quality analytics. So we encourage wherever you are in your organization to start on your journey or risk being left behind in this era of change and disruption. So we also saw that at the top, the artificial intelligence and machine learning, these group of respondents tended, as you would expect, to have a global order to cash process owner and also centralized master data ownership. And they can feed each other, because those centralized functions can help facilitate and get funding for increased thoughtful automation of the order to cash process. So thank you for the poll, and wherever you are, we'd encourage you to keep moving up. It, you know, especially RPA, my experience is it pays for itself rather quickly, and then you can move to the next one, so you can get some tasks automated. So let's flip to the next page and hear what our respondents, we asked them, and that you could select all, but what were their most common uses of specific technologies for both machine learning and for RPA. And you can see machine learning, it actually started at the beginning of order to cash. It's where that sales order, configure price quote shifts over. So it's the seam between effectively the opportunity to order process and the order to cash process. But then also order management and the invoice process. And in RPA, it was just a different order management, the sales, configure price quote, and then order for fulfillment. Now, what about the holy grail of AI, of artificial intelligence? And again, the research participants, 13% used it. Is it indeed the holy grail of automation? So again, we'll go back to our experience with IBM and their quote to cash process transformation. We had spoken with Teresa Durker, who at the time in October was vice president of quote to cash transformation at IBM. And she suggested that they found artificial intelligence helpful when it was part of the experience rather than a tool that employees had to use separately, right? They started out as go to this tool and here's some artificial intelligence, and that did not work. And so the remaining quote is also from Teresa. AI gives information and capability to the practitioner to do their own work, but it must be part of the normal experience of their workflow. And you can save even more time by empowering employees to make faster decisions and handle tasks without trade-offs. So if we can move on now. This was something of particular interest to me. So we asked a question. I know it's perhaps a rather detailed question, but we asked our respondents how they automated the system linkages to streamline order entry. So the question was, how is a customer order entered into your ERP system? And nice little pictures below. You can see 71% said automatically from the customer. So the customer is using, a website or even their phone to do an automatic order, and it flows directly into, the ERP system, which is typically, manufacturing, fulfillment, and invoicing. So certainly that's fast. 69% said that automatically flows from a sales or quoting tool. So the customer is dealing with someone in sales. The salesperson is entering it into their sales tools, like the quoting tool or their CRM tool, and the tools are linked, the systems are linked so that it automatically flows into the ERP. So obviously this is the best way to do it. 40% though still said the orders are done manually, which means there is an order from a customer that hits sales, and there's some person as an intermediary that's, worst case, typing it in, but typing the order in manually. Now, this was a select all that apply question. So since respondents had an option to select all, some may be switching between automated and manual processes depending on the order type. But again, still saying 40% sometimes have manual orders, we found surprising, given customer expectations for transactional speed and for transparency. Also, as you would expect, we found better outcomes and metrics with a more automated order process. The automated processes have better days sales outstanding, by 4.5 days, and better on time and full orders by 2 points. Also, this group, so the group that had automated flows, had enterprise-wide master data management 70% of the time, compared to only 40% of the time where orders were done manually. I think that also speaks to what we've been saying are some of the key performance indicators. So now if we can move, let's go forward into order visibility. So let's if you move forward, I just wanted to share, this is a picture of what DSCI, the Digital Supply Chain Institute, calls the front side flip. And we've done 2 white papers. We did one in 2016, so our own research, and then just updated it recently with what we call a front side flip, which really advocates that the supply chain and of course the order to cash process needs to focus on the customer and reshape the internal processes backwards. And the reason we also talk about today's new customer, it may be the same customer you had yesterday or 10 years ago, but their expectations for business transactions are very different now because of what they see in their personal consumer transactions, right? Once you've ordered on Amazon and had something come to you overnight and had a very seamless experience, you're less understanding of a manual process, in a business-to-business transaction. So we see part of enabling the new customer and doing a front side flip is real-time visibility into changes in order status and shipments. And I would say those are now table stakes, meaning that's the minimum acceptable level. So if you don't have this visibility, and many organizations don't, start with enabling internal stakeholders and then extend to customers. So customers want to know when to expect an order and if a shipment has been delayed. So let's talk about, if you want to move ahead. So we have 2 charts. One is sales visibility into the order status. So this is, again, the internal teams. We asked, how are your sales teams how do they stay informed on the status of customer orders and shipments? And you can see about 2/3 said access real-time web portal and or push notifications of updates. And this is, has an order shipped? Has the status of an order changed? Nearly half can receive that on their mobile phones. But there's still 34%, and again, this was a select all that apply question, so it could be transaction specific, but there was still 1/3 where you had different functions such as sellers calling or emailing order management or manufacturing or perhaps logistics to understand the status of an order. And of course, that you don't want sellers to be tied up and support staff members in back and forth communications across functions. So we see our research that better internal transparency leads to better outcomes. And here in particular, a better end-to-end cycle time. Those that have this transparency, 52 days versus 55 days, end-to-end order to cash cycle time for those that don't have it. And a reason being, this increased visibility enables greater accountability and can highlight and thus reduce potential bottlenecks. So when sales team members have anytime, anywhere access to the status of customer orders, they can resolve issues quickly. And it's more than just the sales teams. Digitally connecting and giving visibility to all the order to cash functions, including manufacturing, logistics, operations, and finance, will improve responsiveness, accuracy, and speed. So, and the next one, as you would expect, customer visibility into order status. And you can see the numbers are similar, perhaps a little lower. And that's, again, because some enterprises start with internal visibility and then they can extend it to customers. But nearly 2/3 customers can see, either they get push notifications of order updates or they can access the information real time. Another 43% email, call, or text for information. They can receive it on their mobile phones. And there's another option here that the sellers will alert customers of updates. So increased transparency and visibility for customers ensures accountability draws attention to bottlenecks in the process. But even more than that, it can bring customers into a closer partnership with you, ideally resulting in fewer issues with invoicing and payment. And if you have a customer present order to cash process with end-to-end visibility across the enterprise, you can better anticipate customer desires in addition to providing the increased transparency. So again, this is something else that we would highly recommend you focus on. So thank you, Marisa. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Kathy. So that's a little bit about the current state of order to cash and where we see top performers separating themselves from the rest of others practicing order to cash. But let's now look at where the future is and where respondents are looking to improve. So we asked folks what improvements they have planned already for order to cash. And these are in order. And at the top, we see that they are focused on fixing the quality and management of the underlying data for their first step. And Kathy mentioned this previously, but because data is really truly the foundation of a strong process and an effective process, this is an essential improvement step. Then we see that they're looking to add automation, which will help speed things as well as reduce errors. And then enabling that seamless transition between the sales and the order to cash processes, that front end integration that Kathy was describing. Next is re-engineering order to cash to be more of this end-to-end versus kind of siloed approach that organizations are moving away from. And then getting real-time visibility for orders and shipments. But what I think is interesting to note is that improving governance was last on the list. I didn't even put it on the slide with the top 5 for those organizations that do not have currently a global process owner. So I would say that fixing data and adding automation are helpful, but consistent process ownership is the key to long-term ongoing success. So don't overlook the need to have somebody with that ability to see the holistic end-to-end process and to be accountable for performance of the whole thing. And then we ask people, so if this is what you're planning to do, why are you planning to do it? What do you hope to get from these improvements? And the biggest benefit that they're looking for from improving order to cash is improved efficiency. Now, we're going to ask you a poll in just a minute to see how you rate the effectiveness of your order to cash process currently. But I'll give you a sneak peek. We actually were surprised by how low respondents rated their current order to cash process. And I think part of this is that the pandemic really affected organizations' abilities to forecast effectively and in some cases to meet their customer demand. And a lot of organizations shifted inwardly to a much more survival cost reduction focus versus a customer focused measure on things like satisfaction or even cycle time. But what we're seeing is that moving forward, organizations really want to bring back that customer focus and improve their satisfaction and their end-to-end cycle time. So speaking of polls, it's time for the third poll. Please, let's open the poll now, and please tell us if you had to rate the effectiveness of your organization's current order to cash process, what would you say? Is it very effective, somewhat effective, neutral, neither effective nor ineffective, just sort of there, or is it somewhat ineffective or very ineffective? So take a moment and just tell us what you think. And like I said, spoiler alert, our participants were pretty harsh on their own organizations in terms of current state effectiveness, but we'd like to know what you think. So take a moment. We'll leave the poll open just for another moment or two to get your take on effectiveness of your order to cash process. All right, we can go ahead and close the poll and let's see. Wow, look at that, Kathy. 4% said very effective. And that's exactly what we got from our research participants, 4%. So this says, hey, there is an opportunity for some improvement here. We see that 40% of you said your process is somewhat effective. So it's getting the job done. Maybe it's not the best possible. And hopefully some of these performance drivers we've been discussing will help you take it to that next level. But then we see about a quarter of you said it's meh, just sort of, neither here nor there. It's just working. But a quarter said it's somewhat ineffective. And what is that? 13% rated your process very ineffective. So when we look at our research participants, we actually had 44% in that last bucket, very ineffective. And I think that part of that is tied into the fact that we are in a state of disruption that doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon. So to counter against that, we strongly recommend organizations focus on strengthening your core, and these foundational processes like order to cash are the way to do that. So let's go ahead and close those poll results, and we will move forward here, to what else we learned. So as we looked at this research, we really see that an organization's customer responsiveness is only as strong as its order to cash process. And that's a big deal, because if you're not being responsive to your customer, as Kathy said, we're all pretty much trained by Amazon these days, right? You want to be able to see on your phone, how many stops away is that order? When does it get to your location? And people are really bringing that consumer mindset into their business transactions. And what we're seeing is that COVID-19 and this pandemic really impacted the perceptions of process effectiveness. So there's a lot of work to do coming out of this pandemic, or as we move into year 3 of this pandemic, depending on how you want to look at it. But we have room for improvement. One thing we saw is that size matters. Now we'll set aside all the jokes we could make about that, but larger organizations tend to be doing a better job at order to cash. And the reason for that is that they are putting resources toward this and really focusing on things like master data management. Sometimes it requires a step above the current workflow and reflection. APQC often talks about in the flow of work and above the flow of work. Some of the improvements needed require going above the flow of work and really focusing on master data management, and not just once, doing a scrub of everything, but an ongoing process to ensure that that data stays clean and consistent across the organization without regard for what department you're in or what location you're in, making sure that you've got consistent data running across the whole thing. And then also, organizations are succeeding when they invest in their people and collaboration. When we look at supply chains as a whole, and order to cash certainly cuts across supply chain with finance and sales and others involved, the number one obstacle for 2022 that organizations said they're dealing with is the lack of collaboration across functions and externally. And order to cash really shows that. If you're not collaborating across functions with your systems and your processes and your process ownership and governance, then you're going to run into these roadblocks along the way. It's going to cause slower cycle time, errors, handoffs that may be less than effective. So investing in your people and the skills they need to be able to use these new technologies. We recognize that as you scale up the automation maturity ladder and go from a simple robotic process automation into something more like machine learning or AI, there are some skill sets that need to shift as well. And we highly recommend investing in your people to make sure that you're not just looking at this as a technology problem, but that you understand that at the end of the day, the success comes from your team. And collaborating with your suppliers and your customers to get better inputs into the process and make sure that you're making that visibility possible for everyone. And so I'll leave you with some key takeaways before we open it up for questions. Today's customers, as Kathy and DSCI have highlighted, have higher expectations for speed and transparency in their business transactions. And that is not going to change. So it's time to make sure your processes are equal to the challenge. High quality master data is foundational. Garbage in, garbage out. Clean your data, and we're talking customer data, supplier data, and product master data, all three. Increasing automation is a differentiator. We recommend you start with the easier robotic process automation, move to machine learning and AI as you can. And then the order-to-cash process is improved with best practices, end-to-end process ownership, standardized processes, common goals and measurements, and visibility and transparency for your sellers and your customers. So I mentioned at the beginning that we have a report that we've published that includes a lot of this information and more. And we put the link here on the screen, and there's a collection with industry reports and other relevant content that is available to everyone. And now, Nikki, let's open it up for questions if we could. All right, so first question that we have, Kathy, I'm going to flip this one over to you.
Sure, and it's Alejandro, if I'm saying it correctly, your question. So the best practice with master data is to have MDM centralized for all different finance functions, question, not sub-functions managing their master data. So certainly every function within finance, but also across the end-to-end order to cash, right? So sales, for example, finance, supply chain, and operations will have inputs to master data. Perhaps they will manage a subset, but what's important is that there's ownership that's risen above. If you go back to the definition of master data, right? A set of identifiers and extended attributes that describe a specific customer or supplier or product. That's what you would want an enterprise-wide master data owner, such as a chief data officer, to manage the governance. So there may be the invoicing part of finance, has customer number one and with specific attributes. Well, if it's the payment process for finance or any others needs to have that same information for customer number one. So hopefully that answers your question. It doesn't mean that only one person owns everything. There's certainly teams, but it's a collective governance. So.
Thanks, okay. Kathy. And in the interest of time, I think we're going to cut off questions there. We have received additional questions, and I want to thank you for submitting them. What we'll do is we'll respond to you via email following the webinar and give you some of our thoughts that way. So I just want to say thank you to Kathy and thank you to everybody who attended today's webinar. You're more than welcome to contact us, both Kathy and myself, and we have our contact information on the screen right now. And again, everyone will receive the slides as well as the recording within a few days. And if you don't already, highly recommend that you connect with us on social media. APQC and DSCI share some of our most current updates in that fashion. And we really appreciate all of you joining us today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.